The third time within a week, pro-Palestinian groups were protesting in Houston. It happened this afternoon. These protests coming in the wake of fighting between Israel and Hamas militants. A ceasefire between the groups happened this week after 11 days of fighting. Gaza health officials say at least 230 Palestinians were killed, along with 12 Israelis. Today's rally brought in thousands of people to the streets outside the Galleria. David Gonzalez was there.
Chants calling for the liberation of Palestine echoed through Uptown on Saturday. Supporters of Palestine gathered to protest against what they call the continued aggression against Palestinian people by Israel.
Whether it's the continued over decade-long siege of Gaza, or the multiple decade occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, or the second-class citizen treatment of Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel, also known as 48 Palestine.
Organizers estimate more than 2,000 people attended the rally on the corner of Post Oak and Westheimer in the Galleria. At one point, videos captured on social media show protesters breaking through a police barricade and taking over the street. They marched toward the Gerald D. Hine Waterwall Park, where they continued their demonstration.
Every individual wants to be free. They want that right anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter. Every individual. We don't want to have tyranny and oppression.
Houston police were able to restore the flow of traffic in the area after some delays. Protesters say this has nothing to do with Palestinians versus Jewish people. They argue it's a human rights issue.
This is not about religion.
Exactly.
This is about justice. That's it.
You can be critical of Israelis' Zionist policies and not be anti-Semitic.
On Friday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, Israel didn't initiate this conflict. We were attacked in an unprovoked manner by the Hamas terrorist organization that fired 4,000 rockets into our capital and into our cities. No country will sit aside when it's attacked in such a criminal fashion. Israel is no different.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This is the third protest here in Houston this week. Organizers say they will continue to demonstrate against the conflict more than 7,000 miles away. In Houston, David Gonzalez, KHOU 11 News.
And as David showed us at today's event, protesters briefly went into the road. In Austin, lawmakers have okayed a bill that would allow for felony charges against protesters blocking traffic if they obstruct emergency vehicles. Governor Abbott saying on Twitter that he will sign it into law soon. His statement also saying, quote, peaceful protest doesn't include blocking roadways and preventing emergency vehicle access. That chaos won't be tolerated in Texas. The bill is in response to last year's nationwide protests against police brutality, which were sparked by the murder of George Floyd. Massive protests erupted in major cities across the country, including here in Houston, where demonstrators were arrested for allegedly damaging property or blocking roadways. And tomorrow,